Conversations. I'm Sarah Colvin. Time once again for our monthly legislative update with Representative Tim Whelan, who represents the 1st Barnstable District here on Cape Cod. Rep. Whelan, Happy New Year. Thank you so much for coming in.
Happy New Year to you too. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Sarah. It's always a joy to come in, speak with you, and speak to your viewership as well, and let them know what's going on up in Boston.
Thank you. And you have the distinction of being the very first guest for 2018. So kicking off the season.
Absolutely. Here we go. We're ready.
We are ready to go. So I want us to start with a couple of grants,
Yes.
certainly for dealing with some important issues here on the Cape. One of them is $55,000. It's going to the Yarmouth Police Department to help with services for domestic violence. So tell me a little bit about that grant and what it's going to do to help the issue here on the Cape.
Sure. The money is sorely needed, and it's what they call a VAWA grant, VAWA. It's an acronym. It's a federal pass-through. So imagine that, the federal government with an acronym. They're the land of acronyms, right? So Violence Against Women's Assistance Grant, federal pass-through. Money comes down, I believe, from the Department of Justice, goes through the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security. And Chief Frederickson, who's a close friend who I stay in very close contact with from the Yarmouth Police Department, had reached out to me back several months ago and advised me that they were putting in for the grant, and also what they envision the grant money would be used for. And what they intend to use this money for is to hire another staff member. I believe it'll be a civilian staff member who will just be full-time assigned to do outreach with the victims, the women and children, excuse me, the men, women, and children who are victims of domestic violence. And so that their interaction with the police agency, with law enforcement, with victim services, with help with agencies that can assist them through the very difficult time, doesn't end with the arraignment or the conviction, that there will be an ongoing conversation. Sometimes some of these victims, and I learned this over my years and years and years of experience with the state police, when I made countless numbers, unfortunately, countless numbers of arrests and witnessed terrible scenes of domestic violence, the sense of being alone that these victims face it's overwhelming for them, and sometimes it traps them, oftentimes I should say it traps them in their abusive situation. So when these victims realize that they're not alone, that there are agencies, there are people out there, when they have someone that's an outreach worker reaching out to them, trying to connect them with needed services, with counseling services, housing services, mental health services for their children, education resources, employment resources, the things that these people need to get back up on their feet and their own 2 feet and stand their own ground and move forward, that's going to be a vital bridge that many people in Yarmouth are going to be able to benefit from this. So what Yarmouth received was, I believe, $55,000 in this grant. It took quite a bit of advocacy, as all this grant money does.
Of course.
With the Executive Office of Public Safety, but they got it. And now, I spoke with Chief Frederickson 2 or 3 times over the past couple of weeks. They're very excited to take this money, put it to use, and they're a very proactive department, and they're going to be working, hitting the ground running, getting out there to help some of these victims and get them moving along in life. We have such a great community down here, and I say this time and again, we have a fantastic community, and we have fantastic nonprofit agencies down here. I mean, the first one that comes to mind, because we do so much with them in my office, is Independence House Incorporated of Hyannis, and many other groups, We Can, and other groups that help to empower these victims and again get them moving on. Well, now they will be connected with the victims through a full-time dedicated worker at the Yarmouth Police Department.
And I think really having that knowledge that there is service out there, you mentioned the feeling of loneliness and concern. I think that it's tough here on Cape Cod, and especially if you're looking at changing your housing situation, changing your work situation. Sometimes it feels easier, it feels safer to stay in that abusive situation, or you feel like there's no way out. So knowing that there are these agencies and that there are people to help and that there's funding coming to be able to help those people is certainly critical. And it's unfortunate that domestic violence continues to be such a big issue, but it is something that we have to deal with. So being able to provide people with the help that they need is certainly important.
I look, Sarah, back, and you again, you hit the nail right on the head, as you always do. The sense of being alone. There were a number of cases where I made an arrest, we got through successful prosecution, more and more chilling details of the abuse that a woman was facing in a relationship would become unmasked during the course of the investigation and the prosecution. And we would get to the court date and the victim would no longer testify and would go back into their relationship with their abuser. And I saw that time and again from a very young age, because I was young when I got into law enforcement. It made an imprint. So when the chief got a hold of me with this, it was full steam ahead. Let's get this. We're really going to help improve. So we might very likely save some lives. And not just the victims, we also have the silent victims of abuse. And those will be the children that grow up witnessing this. And we know that there's that abuse can go on in perpetuity, where a child that witnesses abuse in their home can go on and become abusers themselves or become victims themselves. So this will hopefully break the cycle of violence for a lot of families.
Well, certainly good news for that grant. So another grant I wanted to talk about, I know that a few weeks ago, Governor Baker unleashed a very aggressive housing initiative wanting to add and so many much needed units across Massachusetts, not just here on Cape Cod, in Boston. I mean, Boston is growing like nobody's business. It's unbelievable. But here on Cape, looking at affordable housing, looking at housing that's affordable, a project right down the street from us in South Yarmouth is getting some funding as well. So talk to me a little bit about what you know about the grants coming for that project.
Again, this is another case where our municipal partners reached out to our office and gave us the opportunity to advocate for funding. In this case here, it was the town administrator in Yarmouth, Dan Knappich, had reached out to Rebecca Hanlon and I from my office and advised that they were putting in for a grant. It was through him, and also speaking with the town planner, advised us of the grant they were putting in for, gave us an opportunity to submit a letter supporting the grant, allowed me to make some phone calls to try and talk up the importance of the grant and the great need that we have here. Everybody recognizes we have a tremendous need for affordable housing here in the Cape, probably one of the largest needs in the entire state. So one of the things I found is that when you're on Beacon Hill is if you stay on it and if you stay on message and you keep making the phone calls, eventually somebody's going to listen. And it was interesting. We received notice a couple weeks ago that Yarmouth was going to be getting grant money. They didn't tell us in the email how much. So both Town Administrator Knappich and I drove out to Holyoke. So it was right before Christmas, get in the car, drive right out to Holyoke, and we get there, they make the announcement, and we found out that the total award granted was every dollar that was applied for, $4.55 million.
Wow.
$4.55 million, Sarah, in a combination of tax credits and grant monies, some of it coming, again, federal pass-through, some of it from the state. And what this money is going to help Dakota partners with constructing the Yarmouth Green project on Route 28 in South Yarmouth. There are going to be 69 units of affordable housing that will be included with this, and I believe 7 of those 69 units will go to people who are especially impoverished, that are 30% below the area mean income. And it's just one more positive step forward that we're making. It's a small piece to a very big puzzle. We have so many more problems and issues in the 4 towns in the first Barnstable District with affordable housing. But again, this is a step forward. It'll take many, many more steps forward until we achieve a point that we're in a good place.
Sure,
So.
and I think one of those things is discussion about zoning, and certainly I think we can talk a little bit about that, when you come in again. But really, I think that looking at zoning, looking at density, looking at all of the things that do need to change here on the Cape, while being cognizant of our environment and our way of life, makes it a little challenging to kind of increase those housing, because there's not a lot of buildable land left here on Cape Cod.
I'm doing an awful lot of work with the Cape Cod Young Professionals, talking with them and the Cape and Island Association of Realtors. And we're looking at working closely with the 4 towns in my district and trying to get them to look at and hopefully adopt accessory dwelling unit, local ordinances that allow them. And it's, like I said, that's just one more piece to the puzzle. And you got to throw wastewater in. But a step forward is a step forward. And we certainly don't want to take any steps back. And I'm very grateful to the town of Yarmouth for reaching out to my office. When I came in 2015, at the beginning of 2015, we reached out to all the municipalities and told them, listen, if you're putting in for a grant, please let us know about it, because we want to be able to advocate. And it's paid dividends. We've been able to bring many millions of dollars in state grant money down here to the first Barnstable District, and we look forward to continuing to continue to do so in the future. But again, it starts with our municipal partners, and they've been fantastic.
Wonderful. So talking about money, of course, the budget is something that takes up a lot of your time, a lot of you and your colleagues' time up on Beacon Hill. Governor is about to release his version of the budget. What kind of things can we expect as we get into the budget process, and what does that mean for you and for the constituents?
Sure. Well, based upon what we've already been hearing, being assigned to the Joint Committee, the House Committee on Ways and Means, being assigned there, I've already been to a few of the consensus revenue hearings that we've had and listened to the Treasurer's Office and listened to the Beacon Hill Institute and many other interested parties speak about how much they're going to see the economy grow. I would guesstimate that we're going to see somewhere in the area of a 3 to 3.5% increase. Last year, the governor's budget, when he released it, I believe, was somewhere in the area of $40.2 billion. So I would anticipate that we would see somewhere around maybe $41 billion would be the final number that the governor's budget would come in. The areas of concern that we have going forward, and I know I've mentioned this before when we spoke, is we have to pay very close attention to the rising healthcare costs, because healthcare now consumes 52% of the state budget.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, that's money that's gone before you can pay for anything else. So when we're looking for money for other very valuable, important projects, such as building schools, infrastructure, job creation, well, 52% of that number is already gone. So the everything else category of the budget just keeps getting smaller and smaller. So the House side of the Joint Committee on Healthcare Financing has been working very, very hard, and they will continue to over the next month or so to try and come up with a bill that will address these rising costs. I believe it's 43% of the state budget is consumed by mass health, so we have to take a look and see where those costs are. The other thing that we have to be concerned with too is what's going to be coming out of Washington, because we rely an awful lot on subsidies from the feds to provide, to provide for these monies under the ACA. So we've got our work cut out ahead of us. Healthcare is going to remain the big question. It's a yoke around the state budget that's holding us back. So it'll be interesting to see how the governor's going to address it. He has a very, very strong background in healthcare and healthcare financing, and he's put together a great team that listens to a lot of the groups, that the stakeholders that are involved in this. So that will be important. The other thing to look at is going to be the outside sections of the budget, which are language changes to Massachusetts general law. They generally don't get paid too much attention to, and not too many of them advance in the first year of a legislative session. Now that we're going into the second year of a legislative session, it'll be interesting to see what priorities the governor puts in there as well.
Absolutely, and I'm still thinking that when more than half of that $42 billion is taken up by healthcare costs, it really puts a crunch on all of the other things that we need. And when we're looking at, as you said, infrastructure, when we're looking at social services, tourism, arts, affordable housing, all of those things that we need to worry about, it's certainly like you have to chop your budget in half and say, this is what we've got to deal with, unless you can find a way to kind of squeeze those healthcare costs down. Right.
Well, we had a meeting it was maybe a few months ago, with the Secretary of Health and Human Services, which she brought in, and she showed us a chart with how much the Mass Health enrollment had spiked over the past 5 years, and you can see where a lot of that is. So I think part of what the committee is going to look at is, how can we address the rising enrollment in Mass Health? Certainly private employers can pick up the cost for some of their employees as well, because it can't all be borne by the taxpayer. That, again, I went into office with a full understanding and a full respect. Every dollar that we collect in taxes, that's someone else's money that they worked really, really hard for.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Rep. Whelan, I thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you here in studio, and don't envy the work that you have ahead of you getting that budget together, but I know that you will do the best to make sure that we get what we need here on Cape Cod.
Well, you're very kind, and I hope that you stay warm through this cold snap, as well as all your viewers at home stay warm. And
yes, can you do anything about the weather?
I'm going to go and I'm going to legislate some changes to the weather. Okay. We're going to legislate 20 more degrees to the ambient air temperature right away.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Representative Tim Whelan, of course, representing the 1st Barnstable District, joining us here on Cape Media News Conversations. I'm Sarah Colvin.